to begin with, I think we should just talk about the book itself before knowing you a little more, okay? Because when you've got a book, you first you dive in the book. So the story is very it's emotional. It begins with a little girl called Chinongwa. She lives in a village, and she knows that something is going to happen for her, but she's not quite sure, and nobody tells her anything. So what I want to know is, where did that book come from in your mind?
Okay, first of all, thank you for the invitation, the American Library, and thank you, friends and acquaintances, to come here. I'm really, really happy to see some people I haven't seen for a while, and thank you, Kidi, for agreeing to do the interview. The story, I didn't know I had this story, but it's based on reality. I saw the person I named Chinongwa when I was really small. She was a woman, an old woman in the village. Because of apartheid, a lot of men worked and they were not allowed to have their wives or children. So men from maybe 15 to about, I don't know, 60, a lot of them were in towns, on farms, in mines, working. And in the villages, saw the sort of people who ran the villages were these old women, the grandmothers. And for us kids, there were two camps, the nice ones and the bad ones. The nice ones poured sugar into your mouth, gave you jam in a teaspoon, and you love her forever. And the bad ones smacked you when you're playing in mud, and they go and tell your mother, so we don't like them. And then there was this one that I named Chinongwa. She was a bad woman. We didn't like her. We made fun of her. We kicked her hands. We threw her kittens in the air. And even the nice grandmothers would smack you if you did something wrong. She always said, "Stop, children, stop." And the adults who were watching would laugh. And then one day I overheard two grandmothers talking about her. And because I was there, I thought I could join the conversation. I don't know what I said. And one of them turns around and says, "If you repeat what you heard, I'll wash your mouth with soap." So I ran away, trying to figure out, what did I hear? I couldn't remember what I had heard, but this grandmother suddenly became very interesting to me. And little by little, I started to hear things that were strange, and I would pretend to play when adults were talking and trying to get, what is it? Why is she a bad woman? And I think I was between 3 and 5 at that age. And as I grew old, I understood I was not supposed to ask questions. And I think when I found myself here years later, and I had two kids who were speaking English, and I put them in the French school so that they could speak French again. I wanted to occupy my mind that was going mushy because I spent the whole day with two kids. I didn't speak French. So to occupy my mind, I started writing this story. I think it was to understand what had happened, but it wasn't a book at all. That's why I always say I'm an accidental writer. It was just this woman, and I don't remember saying, what do I write about? So it must have been there without me realizing, because this was a girl, and I'm a girl, and she was given away. And I think somewhere at the back of my mind, there was, will I be given away like her? I think.
So maybe we could just listen to you. Please.
I haven't read this for a long time. Okay. Chinongwa Marewa was 9, but her age was not vital, just her virginity. Though she was not yet washing, her fruits were already protruding. That was a relief for her family. Anyway, she was the only one they could use. Your sister was even younger when she was given. Ambuya never missed an occasion to tell her. It was supposed to make her feel more fortunate than her older sister Muraswa, but the words made her push her earlobes into the holes, a trick she used to block out unwelcome sounds like owls hooting or snoring. But she could only do this when there was nobody around except a blind maternal grandmother. Chinongwa remembered that 2 summers after Muraswa was promised, her betrothed had come with his clan trailing behind to claim what belonged to him. As far as Chinongwa was concerned, Muraswa had then disappeared from the face of the earth into the bushes behind their compound. For some time afterwards, whenever she heard that a young girl had been married off, she imagined her disappearing into the undergrowth. With stoical indifference, she waited for her turn to come.
Thank you very much. So from the very beginning, we feel this young girl her fear about the future. And I don't want to spoil the story, but we have to tell that there's a transaction.
Yes.
Okay? Tell us more.
It's some people in Europe or the Western world who have read it, they say it's selling, she was sold. And I say, no, it's not being sold. The idea was to give her, because in Zimbabwe then, or in many countries in Africa, unlike in India, where is the woman who brings the dowry into the marriage, there is the man who pays the parents of the girl in cows, in goats, or whatever. And so they went around with her looking for anybody who was happy, ready to take her as a future wife, and this person was going to give them food. Remember, this was post-colonial. All these people have been moved away from their land. They've lost their cattle. They've lost land. They've got nothing to eat. And she had 4 brothers and a sister who was given. And she knew also that 2 of her aunts were given. So somehow I think we can all be programmed to accept. And this was kind of, well, you could find a very good husband. And there was also the fact that if she is given away, she is not going to die from hunger. She's going to survive. So I have also had questions like, how could you Africans do anything like that? And I remember going into a school, high school, middle high school, what you call college. And I said, you've seen people who are walking, and they have no food, sometimes no water. And somebody comes and says, I'll give you so much, and you give me your child, and that child will survive. Or you are the person who can do that. You are a little bit in control. It's a question of life and death. So that's what they were dealing. So for them, as far as they were concerned, they were not selling her. They were marrying her off, and they were going to keep relations with the future husband. But as a girl child, she had no say.
The problem is she is a child. She's very, very young.
She is a child. And like I said today, when I wrote this book, I wrote it, it's incredible. This is more than 30 years ago. And when it came out, I would be asked, would that happen in Zimbabwe? Oh, no, you know, it's history. But like I say, a woman's value, when the economy is doing well, a woman can become nearly the equal of a man. But the moment the economy doesn't work so well, she drops to become an object. And I think Chinongwa does that. And today, sometimes I read what's happening in Afghanistan, where these parents are giving away their little girls to men who will take that child and they will never see that child. And it's sad to think something that I thought was history is happening today. And you think, what do we do? And in Zimbabwe, during the crisis, 1998, and then the 2008 financial crisis, this is the reason why I've reissued it in Zimbabwe, because it never came out in Zimbabwe. I heard that girls, they're not being taken around, but they're being pressured to marry, in general, older men. So a child, 9, 10, 13, it doesn't matter. They are not going to go to school. They are pressured to marry somebody, and that's the end of their lives. And you sit there and you watch, you think, how can this be happening today?
Let me return just for a little detail. You had that story inside you.
I must
and
say.
It was that grandmother in the village. But why did people look down upon her?
Well, I don't want to spoil the story for those who haven't read it, but I think it's sometimes when you say human nature, we tend to excuse many things. At the same time, we've seen it over and over again. When we do something horrible to somebody, like the French saying is qui celui qui n'aime plus son chien l'accuse de la rage, or something like that. Person who doesn't want his dog anymore, they accuse it of, what is rage in English? Rabies. So you go and drown your dog because it's got rabies. But Chinongwa, they did something horrible to her. But so every time they see her, I think they feel guilty. And instead of saying, oh, we're so sorry, they accuse, it's happening today, accuse the victim blaming. Also, like we know when somebody gets raped and they go to court, and now we are not allowed in many countries to say, what were you wearing? Oh, you couldn't have been wearing that short skirt. What did you expect to happen to you? So this old woman was in this village. A lot of the people in the village knew what had happened to her, were ashamed of what happened to her. And of course, I think they would have wanted to forget about it, but I think just the fact that she's there reminds them every time they see her that they did something. So we decide she's a bad woman. If something like that happens to you, there is something you do. I mean, the war in Ukraine is the fault of Ukraine. That's what, yes, Putin is saying, it's Ukraine, it's your fault. Okay. So you beat somebody and say, you shouldn't have looked at me like that.
Okay, let's talk about the book's structure. There are 2 other characters, and you begin with the first part, the little girl, and then she's grown up.
Yeah.
And you have 2 other characters.
Yeah.
Tell us about the way you found that structure and why.
Well, why? I can't tell you why, because I like I said, I wasn't writing a book. I was just writing this story. So when I was writing it, the first part, she was a kid, so that was okay. She couldn't say, so I wrote it in 3rd person omniscient. So, you know, the powerful voice that sees everybody into everybody's mind, the parents, the villagers, and everybody. And then when she is taken by this woman to give her as a gift to her husband, this woman is a co-wife. She's the older wife. And there was a status given to the older wife. She could sort of run the other wives. So at the same time, she took her in when she was 9. So they had a very complicated relationship. As far as Amaiguru, the first wife, was concerned, she was a nice person who had saved this little girl and given her shelter, food, and everything. So she looked after her. And when Chinongwa was small, this was a mother figure who fed her. But also the other reason why she was feeding her was that her husband was, when she took her husband was not there. And when he came back, he said, what the hell is this? What have you done? I don't want a child for. And now she was like, what do? I've given cattle and food to Chinongwa's parents. I can't go and give them back their child because it just was not done. Anyway, the food was gone and maybe the cattle had been given away as well. So her agenda was to make Chinongwa as attractive as possible so that her husband takes her. And for Chinongwa, this was somebody who was feeding her, eat, do this, walk like a woman, don't scream, don't shout, don't run. You're a married woman who was like a mother. And I think Amaiguru thought their relationship was always going to be like that. She was in charge. After all, she was in charge of this situation. She brought it about. But when as Chinongwa grew older, became her mother, she also wanted now to have a status of a wife, just a wife. And she didn't want the first wife always telling her what to do. So my guru was like, excuse me, I raised you. I am here. And the husband was like, I just don't even want to hear your stories because one, he said, I never wanted this. So he was blaming his older wife for bringing this child. At the same time, he was sleeping with his child, who was now sort of a young woman, and they were having children. But deep down, he was still ashamed of having a child wife that he never asked for, that he did not love. And Chinongwa wanted the husband to love her. She couldn't understand because in Shona, you say the second wife or third wife, the younger wife or the youngest wife, depending on how many women, is the beloved. So she wanted to be the beloved. And in villages like that, you had groups of second, third, fourth wives together, but the Wahos also were together and they didn't really like each other. So Chinongwa was with these other women who were second, third wives who always talked of how their husbands loved them more, how they tricked the first wife, how they brought them this so that the first wife doesn't know. And she's like, I want that too. I'm the wife. And the husband was like, just get away, go and speak to Amaiguru. And Amaiguru was like, I'm going to the wedding. When I come back, I'll give you my dress and then you can go to the wedding, because Chinongwa didn't have any nice clothes. Amaiguru had the nice clothes and she didn't even know how to talk to her husband. She was kind of scared of him. So when she needed something, she would go and tell the first wife, and the first wife was like, I'll deal with it. So they had a very complicated relationship of mother-child, but jealous wives, and the husband who was sort of, I don't want to hear. It was complicated for both of them.
What I love in the book is that you really know how you really show the relationships and the deep questions that people have. And it's a very serious situation. People are hungry, or economically it's not good. But you see inside every of them, and you really describe everything it's very sensitive.
Yes, I think that's why even the second book, because it's divided into two books. So the first book, I said third person omniscient. And at first I wrote this second book also in third person, but there were some times when I couldn't, because I couldn't go inside the characters deep, where the gut feeling, what they were feeling. And I remember somebody reading the book and say, but where is the truth? And I say, well, that is the question. Where is the truth? Because the two women are talking about the same events, but they're coming to this event from different angles. So one thing that happened, and my guru sees it as an aggression from Chinongwa, and the Chinongwa sees it as trying to get her independence. So that's why, and also I wanted the reader maybe, or I didn't know how to do the transition from this child who comes and she's 9 years old. And then at 11, she's a mother already. She's a mother, she's a wife, she's a second wife, she's a stepmother. And in a village where she doesn't really know anybody. So my transition was to suddenly make Chinongwa speak for herself. So that's why some people say it's a little bit in your face, but it's also because in the beginning, she's not speaking, she was seen, she was a child. And there, suddenly, she's a woman, she's a mother, and she wants to protect her children, and she doesn't want to be told. So she grew up very, very fast, and I wanted that to show how fast she had to grow.
Okay, Lucy, you say, you used to say you're not a writer. Let's talk about being a writer. You said you're an accidental writer. What is it for you, becoming a writer? When will you become a writer?
I think the accidental writer suits me very well because it's somewhere in between. I am a writer. And,
maybe tell us a little bit about your childhood and the way, how you found your way through Zimbabwe, from the village to Harare and then to the world.
Yeah, I would never have imagined it because, all right, so let's go to Rhodesia during apartheid. Schools are separated and we were 4 races: whites, Asians, colored, and blacks. And the blacks are at the bottom of the heap and the whites are there. And as a kid, it was perfectly normal because they had big houses, cars, and everything. And it was just like the rain, you get wet when it rains. And the leaves are green and then they turn, I don't know, yellow or red at some time. And the whites are rich and they're more intelligent than you and everything. And the books that we read were all coming from, I thought, England, because even Mark Twain, I thought he was English. And all the books, and they were, I think they removed everything that could give us ideas of being equal to whites. So my world was very neatly divided into writers who were all dead and they were all white and they were all from England because we read Jane Austen, we read Dickens, we read all the classic English writers for children. So for me, you have to be dead and you have to be white to write a book. So there was no way I could write. Another thing, when I was in school, I was very good in maths. And we were told, or I don't know if anybody ever told me, but it was understood that if you do maths, you will do science subjects and maths. And if you not, you can do literature, and the two cannot go together. So definitely I was not going to be a writer. So even after I finished writing Chinongwa, I was living in Melbourne. And
tell us about the way, how did you go from the village to Melbourne?
Okay. I came to France in '86 because I met a Frenchman, married a Frenchman, came to France. Then we went and lived in the States. And then when we came back from the States, that's when the children didn't speak French. So I said, I must put them in school. And that's also another reason I always want to thank the French government for providing free school. I would never have written a book. So the children were going to school 3 hours in the morning, 3 hours in the afternoon. And I was sitting there. I tried to befriend some women but we were talking about the décolleté of Claire Chazal, and so it was a little bit difficult. So I thought my brain was going to mush. So I had to do something intellectual to occupy myself. But because it wasn't a book, it just took forever. It didn't matter, did it? And then when I was in Melbourne, so from Nosy to Melbourne, I finished my book. And because also the children were in school, I enrolled in this creative writing class in a university in Melbourne. And that was nice. And that's when I said, oh yeah, I've got, and people started calling it a manuscript. And so, can we read? Sure. Can we read? Sure. So I gave people, and then they started calling it a book. And I was like, for me, there was also this wall that was very high and very thick where some people were there, wrote books and threw it there. And I was here where I caught it and read it. And I read everything I could find. So I didn't think it would be a book. So this friend found a publisher in South Africa. At first, I wouldn't even send the book, in the end sort of forced me to. And then the South African publisher said he was going to publish it. And I'm like, what? Is this how you write a book? So it was published. And my program was, once my second child was 10, I would go to work because I was also learning French. So when my son was 12, I went to work. So this book gets published in South Africa, and I'm now teaching. And it was kind of a secret. Some friends knew that I had written a book, but it was sort of far away, secret life. And then it comes out, it's translated into France. Even then, it was Jake Lamar, an American writer who lives in France, who read it and said, oh, whoa. And then one day he writes me and says, can you send your book to this person, Bena Manier, on this address? And I was in Zimbabwe, so I said to my son, send a copy of Chinongwa to this address, to this person. And I forgot. Then I had an email saying, can we meet? And I'd completely forgotten. So I meet him. Then he said, I'm going to submit it, and they may be interested. And the next year, I get a mail from ActiSud saying, oh, the rights division will contact you, welcome into the house. I was like, okay. And I remember finishing reading the French version on a plane going to Algeria, which was the first book fair. And I go there, and in the afternoon, we are taken in these cars to the book fair from the hotel. And I've always been a reader. I love book fairs. And we are going through sort of this tunnel or hallway. And on all the walls are pictures of writers, but larger than life. So I'm like, oh, I know this person. Oh, I've read this person. I'm really quite excited. And suddenly I see myself. I'm like, oh. So I run away, go away really quickly because people are now looking at me. And then journalists would say, when is your next book? And I'm like, I never said I was going to write another book. So I felt like, the imposter, like somebody's going to discover that I'm not. And I went, have you written a book? Yes, just one. Like, are you a writer? I just wrote one book. So it was very strange. And I couldn't bring myself to write. Even when I stopped to work in 2015, I said, okay, I'm going to write. I couldn't. I was grinding my teeth at night, and I had to go to a dentist to get some plastic thing, so that, because I just couldn't, and I would sit in front of my laptop, and I just couldn't. And that's why after a year, suddenly sort of say, okay, you have to accept it. And I accepted when people wanted an essay or an anthology. We have done an anthology together and said, oh yes, because I knew they knew exactly what they wanted, and I would do that easily. But I was also now very scared of writing because I had to write better than Chinongwa or not write at all. So scary.
No. I don't know if I can say that. Is it secret that you work as a writer every day, and you wrote short stories? You're writing another book. I mean, your soul, your heart, your body is full of stories.
Yes, I think now I have accepted it, and I have I've also met other writers. And also I remember meeting Mavis Garland. I don't know if anybody of you know, she's a Canadian writer. For me, she's up there with Doris Lessing. And she told me, oh, I'm always worried that somebody is going to find out that I'm an imposter and I'm looking at this one. So that does help you. And when you talk of many writers who are all feeling like imposters, so you think, oh, I suppose that this is it. But I always had the impression that writers were, I don't know, come from a kind of mold that was, God said, these will be writers. And I didn't. So I was like, oh my God, they're going to look at me like, who do you think you are?
I think you're a writer as a friend. And I want to, it is the last part. I know that you're working on a big novel about Zimbabwe. No, what I want to say is that you have things you want to say, and Zimbabwe is something you want to, it's a kind of topic you want to address it, really.
Yeah, yes. I'm
write for an
struggling.
audience.
Yes, I'm struggling with it because I think I don't write from A to Z. I don't know. Anyway, it's a mess. So maybe I think it's because also it's the book that I've decided to write. Because when I look back at apartheid and how I grew up, with hindsight, it looks like it was a comedy of errors. And you think, did really people believe that? Did I really, or when I tell people, some people don't really believe me, you live, what? I said, yes, we were 4 races, and it was very important to know where you could go, where you could not go, what you, and there were suburbs for whites, for Asians, for coloreds, and then for blacks, and there were jobs. And even if nurses, they were all nurses, they had all done the same course, but their salaries were different depending on whether you were white. Teachers, everything. And when you begin, and also for me, because I didn't know any white people when I was growing up, because we lived separately. I remember in my first job, not quite sure how to deal with it because I had been told whites are more intelligent. And when the white person tells you that the capital of Australia is Sydney, you are like, oh, and you know that if you tell them, I don't think so, you could lose your job. So you had to deal with that. And I've met quite a few ex-Rhodesians in Australia, and sometimes it gives some very funny or comical situations because I think I don't know if it's hatred or their lives from before come back, something kicks in, which happens to me as well. Every time I go to Zimbabwe, I notice, I go into a room, I know how many whites, how many colors, Asians, and I count. And when I see a poor white, I still, my jaw drops in Zimbabwe. But when I come here, sometimes I don't remember if the person was white or not. I usually remember what people said. but not what they look like. So I think that's why I decided I need, because it's also a mess in my head. So I think when you write something, for me, when I write something, I'm clarifying, like this story, I needed to clarify to know what happened, why this woman ended like this. And once I understood, I said, oh, okay. So I'm writing a book that I hope one day I'll finish, the last days of apartheid in Rhodesia, just before independence, because I was working in this center where there were whites and blacks and colors and Asians, and things were changing, and the independence was coming, black rule was coming, and how do you deal with it? And then it came. So, but it was a piece of paper that Prince Charles signed. And then the next day, people are unscrewing Europeans only from benches. And you are like, oh, there's a bench, I can now sit on it, but you don't really quite dare go and sit on it. And you don't know what will happen to you. And these hotels you couldn't go into, restaurants that you couldn't go into. And then also sometimes black waiters refusing to serve you because they've never served a black person. So it was a very complex situation. And I'm also trying to see how it affected those people, because after I became friends with some of them. And we didn't know each other. A lot of them believed what they were told, just like I believed what I was told when I was growing up. So yeah, it's something that I think I need to understand how you dehumanize the other. Is it because you are comfortable with who you are, or is it because you are very uncomfortable with who you are? You've got these insecurities, and telling the other person that you are superior is a way of, I don't know, dealing with your insecurities. And I think it's a debate that's still going on, like sexism, racism.
Do you feel you're more Zimbabwean because you're away today? How do you feel about your?
You know, since my mother died, that was in 2013, sometimes I have the impression that there was a rope or a string that anchored me to Zimbabwe. That was my mother. And now that she's not there, I'm floating. I'm not suffering. Actually, I'm quite happy to be nobody from nowhere, because I'm always worried when people say, I'm American, or I'm French, I'm proud to be French. And when you haven't done anything to be French, we're just born there. And I'm always worried. I will never say I'm a proud Zimbabwean, but I think there are things when I go to Zimbabwe, there are pieces that fall into place. And sometimes you sit down and maybe I belong more because I've got a French passport. I'm French, but am I French? And when you say you're French and somebody who thinks they're more French than you, say, oh, really? Or when they say, where are you from? Or what are you? And you say, I'm French. You're French? From where? From Nosy. Yes, but from where? But so even though you want to say, I'm quite happy with here in France, there are some people who don't really think so. And I think in Zimbabwe, that's the only place where nobody can say, even though when I grew up, I didn't belong because I was a fourth-class citizen, what we call cattle class in Zimbabwe. So I've never really belonged, because I left Zimbabwe 6 years after independence, when we were still trying to to live together as blacks and whites, where when you were saying, can I go in there if there are too many whites that are looking at me, and where I was told sometimes sort of like I wanted to go and play golf with some friends who were white, and one of the friends who was white had denims, so he was told, no, you can't play. So he said, okay, I'll be a Kidi. And they said, why are you kidding for me? I said, oh, he's kidding for me. And they said, oh, no, in this country, we don't have Kidis of this color. So this was my home. So there's something that says, yeah, it was home. So when it became really home, for example, when I see my nephews and nieces who were born after independence, they don't have these issues with me. They are really home. And because I also left more than 30 years ago, the country moves on, and there are some things that I don't understand when I go back home. And sometimes I say things and my siblings say, oh, yeah, okay. And they continue their conversation. So do I really belong or do I not belong? It's very strange.
It's your ground.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Lucy. Maybe you have questions.
Can we get a big round of applause first, please? Thank you so much for that amazing discussion. We'll open it up to questions from the audience now. So we'll start with people in person in this room, and then we will check in on our Zoom audience in just a second. But just to get started, there was a question already over there. Yes, I will bring you the microphone.
Well, thank you very much.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So your story, that story that you wrote, it takes place after independence. Yeah?
No, sorry.
Ah,
It's end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century.
No, I was a little late coming, and I thought, gosh, what happened in colonial times? Did that go on in colonial times as well?
That was, my story is post-colonial.
Post-colonial.
Yes.
So that is after independence.
No, after colonization.
That one. Okay.
Yes.
That one.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. That
I think it starts in 1910 or something
right.
like that.
I understand now.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have other questions in the room? Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for that talk. I had the privilege of living and working in Southern Africa for several years, and I visited Zimbabwe for work at a time when Mugabe had just stepped away, and it was a time of great hope. Unfortunately, things haven't quite gone that way. How do you see it's a big question, but how do you see the way your country is going right now? And I also salute the fact that I've come across many very good Zimbabwean authors, so you're not alone by a long shot. Thank you.
I think a lot of Zimbabweans are very creative, because when you live in conditions like that, you become very creative. I look at the future of Zimbabwe through very troubled waters. The vision is not very clear. And of course, every time you think there is a change, we hope, and I would like to keep hoping. There are moments when you really despair, because you think maybe one day somebody's going to see reason. And I think the worst thing about Zimbabwe is how all these bright people are living, because it's very, very difficult. Free speech is a little bit difficult. The economy is not doing very well. And a lot of the doctors, the lawyers, all the scientists, people who are educated are leaving. And I don't want to lose hope. I don't want to lose hope, but the question is how long? And also we've lost memory of people who lived when the country functioned relatively well. So it's difficult. There are going to be elections, I think, this year or maybe next year. We will see. We will see. It's very difficult to tell. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, we have another question.
Hi, Lucy.
Hi.
Hi. No,
Anna.
but first of all, thanks for the conversation. Very, very interesting. No, but I just want to say that I read the first one and I love it. And I just want to encourage you to finish the one that you're writing. No, because you look at the topic that you are dealing with, I think that is not a topic of the apartheid. It's a topic that is will be very useful for today kind of discriminations and things. That mean that I just want to encourage you to finish, and I will be looking forward to reading it.
No pressure. Thank you, Anna. I had hoped Kidi wasn't going to ask that question. I didn't want her to ask that question. And the reason I wrote short stories is also because I was afraid of Chinongwa. So, but now everybody knows that I'm writing the book. She has said it in public. So it's going to be a little bit more pressure, but give me 1 year, please. Maybe I will try, but I kept Chinongwa for so long, more than 10 years before publishing it. So I would go back and I'm always worried. And I think I'm a slow writer. And I will try. And at the same time now I'm thinking, I thought this was something for the past, girls being given away, and it's come back. And like you say, right now, people are, at the same time, I'd like to think maybe it's good that people are talking about it. At the same time, I remember when I was small, I was quite convinced, I think when I was 7 or 8, that adults didn't understand. But with time, people all become very intelligent and realize that racism is just so stupid, just the fear of the other. And I think I thought science would teach people and racism will be something of the past. And to think that we're still talking about it today, it's very sad. And I don't mind somebody not liking the color of my skin. That's fine. What I find difficult to live with is somebody stopping somebody from being who they are. Like, you are not going to do this because you are Black. You are going to sit where it's cold because you are Black, and I'll sit where it's warm. Or I'm going to do it because I'm a man and you are a woman, you can't vote. When you sit down to think of it, it's incredible that humanity is so stupid that somebody decides, I make the rules and I make them for you and you obey them. And when now people are saying maybe racism is not good, there is like, oh my God, woke. Oh my God, woke. No, we are just talking about human rights. You do not stop somebody from being who they are just because you don't fancy it or just because they're going to be in competition with you. So that I find very, very difficult to deal with. And I remember when I was asked to speak to the European Parliament, it was 2020, I think, International Day Against Racism. And the question was, as a writer, as a Black woman, and as a woman, how does racism affect you? So when I did research for my speech, and I discovered how much the advance, because publishers can give a writer an advance, and the difference between what is given to a Black woman to a white man, it was staggering. Even writers who had proven themselves. So those are things. And I remember this Black girl who wrote, I can't remember if it was science fiction or fantasy, and she sold millions, and she won, a first book won a prize, she sold millions, and she was given 25,000 as an advance. The next book sold millions, and she was given another 25,000 as an advance. And the third book, they gave her 50,000. And then when I compared to some white girl who was writing a first book, and she got 200,000. And a young man who was writing his first book, a white young man, he was given 800,000 for a book. So a woman, and most women have got children, have got to look after parents, and they're not even given an advance. An advance is is what helps you to write. And I remember when I won a book in a village in France, it's called Hagondage, because I always want to be very grateful to these small towns that spread literature. And I gave a speech, and I dedicated that prize to these books that women will never write, but they will remain in their heads, because you need time to write. So if you give a writer an advance, you are giving them time to write. That women who are working, who come back from work, they go and pick the child, they give the children a bath, then they feed them, and then they feed sometimes the husband who is sitting there waiting to be fed, and then they iron the clothes, they put the clothes out and everything. When are they going to write? They write the book in their head when they're driving, they're going to school or taking school. But we need equal treatment so that women can also get that advance that allows them to write. Residencies that men are given, we should also give women, and we should not give them because we should not decide because this person's color is this, they'll get a little bit less than this. It sounds ridiculous when you look at it, like, give us your hand, oh, okay, a little bit light, oh, okay, we'll give you a little bit more. But this is what we are doing. It's ridiculous, but this is the world we live in.
Thank you for such a wonderful response. And yes, we have time for more questions in the room.
So how do you feel about this gap between the generation that knew apartheid and the one that was born after it?
Oh, I think they give me hope. And it's quite strange because sometimes when we talk to them about, we sound like, are you sure that happened? Because they just don't understand, because they grew up, they went to the same schools as whites, and they don't even really see the differences between themselves because they never had to deal with. And every time I go to Zimbabwe, I'm driving or through, and I know that this used to be a white neighborhood. This used to be a colored neighborhood. This was an Asian neighborhood. I was not, because for me, it was survival. It was physical, a gut feeling, but they don't have that. So it's like, wow, it's possible. And it's something I really do believe I have hope in the young people, because even the woke, I don't know, phenomenon thinking, I think it's also driven by young people who don't understand what is wrong with us. I don't know if you saw that it was a little clip done in Norway where somebody gave teams of boy, girl, to do something like just put this away, put everything away, toys, blue ones here, red ones there. And then when they finished, they gave them jars with candy. And the girl had very little, and the boy and the children stood there and looked. They were, I think, 7 or 8, and they were looking at the person like, what is going on? I said, well, she's a girl, so she'll have little, and you are a boy, you'll have more. And the boy was like, I don't understand. So our kids or in Zimbabwe, they are like, I don't understand.
Yes, our last question.
Currently, how is the food and water situation in the towns and in the villages?
Listen, I don't want to say I know very well, because because of COVID. I haven't been to Zimbabwe since 2018. And it also depends on where you live. I think in the countryside, people in the countryside, I think they got food because the joke is give Zimbabwe a square meter and they will grow vegetables and maize and beans. But in towns, I think it's very difficult because the jobs, rate of inflation, it's very difficult, and the electricity is not always there. So that's difficult in cities. Yeah, but I'm not very knowledgeable because I haven't been for a while.